It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. From New York, we're joined by Noor Ibrahim, managing editor of The Daily Beast. How are you?
Thank you. How are you?
Not so bad. A busy week for Borzu Daragahi, who joins us from Istanbul, international correspondent for The Independent. How are things?
It's only rock and roll, but I like it.
Okay. Matthew Dalton is correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. How are you doing?
Okay.
You're wearing your Free Evan badge, as in?
Evan Gershkovich, correspondent who's in prison in Russia. I'm just in prison just for being a journalist, and so every time I come on here, I'm going to wear the pin just to remind people of what he's going through.
All right, well, we had good news here in France with the liberation of Mortaza Behboudi, our colleague and friend who'd been held in Afghanistan. So perhaps it'll soon be for Evan. Gil Mehaley is editor-in-chief of the French publication Causeur. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Welcome
Good to be here again.
Good to see you. You can listen, like, and subscribe to The World This Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other fine streaming services. Residents in Gaza, they'll have to wait another day. Trucks loaded with desperately needed aid still stuck this Friday on the Egyptian side of the Rafah border crossing, but according to the UN, should be, quote, rolling in the next day or so. It's day 14 of a conflict triggered by Hamas's cross-border slaughter of more than 1,000 Israeli civilians. The UN Secretary General making his way to Rafah with this plea.
These trucks are not just trucks. They are a lifeline. They are the difference between life and death for so many people in Gaza.
Gil Mehaley, everything seems deferred. The humanitarian aid going in, the ground invasion. Let's start with the
Not going in. It's waiting to go in.
Yeah. So what's the holdup here?
I think there's a problem with the Egyptians. They are holding this. It takes time with the Egyptians.
No, they're saying that the roads still need to be fixed, or
I don't know, but anyway, the trucks are there for quite a few days, and I think there's the green light from the Israeli side. There's a green light from the Egyptians in general, but they're still on the wrong side of the border.
Can you have a humanitarian corridor without a ceasefire, or is that quietly been organized?
I think that it is not so quietly organized. The indicated places on the beach, they are going to allow people to go from the north to the south. And I think that if and when the ground operation will start, there will be also ways to go through and move from the north to the south.
So there are negotiations going on. We have further proof of that with the announcement that's been confirmed by Israeli television, that by Israeli media, that Hamas has released two hostages of U.S. nationality. The source of the Israeli confirmation has not yet been confirmed. So there is back-channel activity at this point, Borzu Daragahi.
Yeah, I mean, every major or minor player, even in the region, Turkey, Qatar, Egypt, of course, is trying to de-escalate the situation. It's not really good for anyone. And there are negotiations going on, I imagine. There are phone calls being made. We saw the U.S. officials coming through the region, the U.K. official, the U.K. Prime Minister Sunak coming through the region as well. And I'm sure there are attempts to reach out to Hamas here in Istanbul, where Erdogan, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has said that he is willing to try to negotiate a settlement between Israel and Hamas, as well, of course, as the kind of old school brokers between Israel and Hamas, Qatar and Egypt.
Yeah, you mentioned all the flurry of diplomacy. Noor Ibrahim, Cairo's the place to be this Friday, and particularly Saturday, what with a peace summit being organized. But whereas we're getting top leadership from the region, it seems as though some Western countries not sending their top leaders. France will be represented by its foreign minister. Still unclear who will be representing the United States.
I'm sorry, Francois, I'm having trouble hearing you. Could you repeat that?
Well, just basically your thoughts on whether this peace summit that's due to take place on Saturday in Cairo, what it can achieve.
I mean, it's really difficult to say, and I think earlier what we saw is the way this crisis is unfolding is getting reactions that are really standing out and is just really not the norm. And I think we saw that with what happened with Biden's planned summit in Jordan, and the way that the hospital explosion completely threw a wrench in that. So at this point, I think there is a feeling of dread. There's an overall environment of that we're on the cusp of something that could be very catastrophic. And although we don't know exactly what's happening behind the scenes, the truth is there's just this overall feeling that things are headed in a downward spiral and will continue to do so over the next few days.
Nor, how would the script have been different if, as planned, Joe Biden had first traveled to Israel on Tuesday and then on, as you mentioned it, to Amman to meet the Egyptian and Palestinian presidents?
I don't know if it would have changed much. I think there's a lot of anger across the Arab world, and a big part of that is just how Biden's approach to this entire situation has been, especially how measured he's been in his condemnation of the loss of Palestinian life, Palestinian deaths. There is a lack of clarity on why he can't condemn both, the taking of Israeli hostages, what happened with that, and at the same time the Palestinian deaths and the crippling siege that's taken place, and just the horrific figures that have been reported. I think somewhere between 3,000 to 4,000 people, and I think that that just goes to the message that he's kind of saying when he is so measured with those responses, that maybe the Palestinian deaths have been normalized. Maybe it is just easier to stomach for one reason or another. And that's why you have so many people out on the streets from Jordan, from New York City, from everywhere in the world, is that people don't want this to be the norm. They don't want to divorce what's happening on the ground right now with the larger picture of an occupation that has been going on for over more than 5 decades. And I think it's a rejection of that kind of rhetoric that's coming out. And I think people are seeing things, I don't know if it's more clear, but there's definitely a message there that people are not taking very well to.
So last week, Matthew Dalton, the shock over the slaughter of those civilians in a kibbutz, at kibbutzes, at a music festival, and now these images that bombard us on Tuesday, conflicting narratives over what happened at Gaza's Al-Ahli hospital, but there was immediate outrage throughout the Arab world. How has the tragedy changed the equation?
I don't know if it's changed the equation. I think that when it happened, people went back to their corners. If you were inclined to believe Israel and what Israel says, you were inclined to take seriously their claim that the rocket that hit that hospital came from Palestinian Islamic Jihad and not from Israel. And if you were not inclined to believe Israel and anything that they say, as much of the Arab world and the Palestinians are not inclined to, you're never going to believe this claim, also coming from the U.S., back from the U.S., that this was Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So, you had these two competing narratives, and the claims that Israel made. Israel has become very conscious of the need to try on social media to come out quickly with its rebuttals to claims by Palestinians about particular attacks, about their violation of norms of war, that they're targeting civilians. So they did come out very quickly with on their social media accounts saying, we've intercepted.
Yeah, there was a press conference the next day, but was it too late since already
Sorry, Francois, can I chime in here?
Go ahead, Noor Ibrahim.
I think that's an oversimplifying what this is actually about. I mean, I do not think it's this narrative that Israel is above hitting healthcare providers. I don't think it's only because people on the ground in Gaza are inclined to believe that. It's because I think the last UN report that came out said there's been 51 incidents of healthcare providers and centers and personnel being attacked since October 7th in Gaza. That's not my opinion. That is what is happening. And
well, I'm not denying that.
Has a lot to do with the situation as opposed to. Sure. Let me
Matthew
finish
Dalton.
though.
Yeah, I'm not denying that. I'm just saying in this particular instance, these rockets do fail. They're not reliable. They do go astray. They're incredibly imprecise. The claim that it was not an Israeli missile that struck that hospital should be taken seriously.
But Borzu Dargahi, you and I are old enough to remember things like the bombing of the Sarajevo market and this kind of thing. And in those days, there was a lack of images when things like this happened. Today, we're just bombarded with a slew of images from all sides.
I think that I'm not going to get into what these images mean. I'm going to leave that to the Bellingcats of the world. But I would just say that, I don't think there's any good guys in this whole scenario. I think that there's thugs and bullies and autocrats, and they're throwing bombs at each other, and the victims are the civilians. And it should be clear that there's no one to root for here, and that there's no side that is righteous. And in this conflict that has been going on for so many decades and just getting worse and worse, and until the fundamental issues of this region, of that particular region, of the land of Israel and Palestine are resolved, you're just going to get this escalation. They blame Iran. Okay, why did you give Iran an open door to come in here and exploit this? Every country has these fissures. Every nation has these pressure points. And, creating a situation where your enemy state can come in there and just completely exploit it for its own ends and totally unsettle your country is your own mistake. And so it's become a terrible situation. It just keeps getting worse. I disagree with Noor. I agree with a lot what she said. I don't think it's going to turn into a big escalatory war because Israel doesn't really want it and Iran doesn't want it, and Israel could crush Hamas. There's a misbalance of power there, and there's an uncertainty about what would a war mean for Israel and what would a war mean for Iran, that neither country wants to go there. So, I don't think it's going to escalate, but it's just going to get worse and worse, at least not this round. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse for the ordinary people who live in this region.
But there is this sense, Gilma Haley, that time is not on Israel's side in the court of world public opinion, because a ground invasion is going to mean a lot more civilians killed.
Yes, and we know that there will be a lot of pressure on Arab regimes from their public opinion, and also in Europe. We saw the demonstrations in Rome, we saw the demonstrations in London, in other places.
Actually, it was interesting because we saw in Cairo this Friday demonstrations in several places, some of them pretty well managed, lots of pro-Sisi slogans, and then others, our reporter was saying, at Tahrir Square, there were anti-Sisi slogans being chanted.
The only Muslim nation that is where the people is for Israel is Iran. So everyone else is very, 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 very upset about what happened. And I think what happened psychologically, it's interesting what happened Tuesday. There was an immense relief because the massacre of October 7th put even many Arabs and Muslims in a very difficult situation because it was horrible. Even Hamas, which was very proud of it, after a few days they started to say, no, it's not us, it's the civilians that came after. We are warriors of Islam, and of course it's against the rules of Islam. And when they thought that Israel made this mistake, and there were 500, they said, what a relief. We can attack Israel, everything is back in order. Israel lost its moral advantage, and this is why they jumped at it so quickly before they understood what was going on. And it was ridiculous because 3 or 4 hours later, it was 99% sure that it was a rocket from Islamic Jihad. There were probably 500 out of the 600 or 700 rockets fired that fell in Gaza. So one, we don't know how many of the 3,000 casualties were killed by Israel and how many by stray or misfires. And since Hamas lied so bluntly Monday about the incident, and they said that there are 500 or even 800 dead, and now the European intelligence think that there are between 10 or 50. So all the outrage about 3,000 dead may be completely off.
Hold on.
Maybe there are.
Are you talking about the hospital attack?
We are talking about the hospital attack, and we're talking about the number. If Hamas lied Tuesday about the number of dead in the hospital.
They said 471 was their number.
In Europe, they think there are maybe 10 to 50. In Israel, they think there are less. These are all Hamas numbers. How do we know that there are 3,000 dead?
It's fog of war stuff trying to calculate that.
No, but everyone, the thing with the Israel maneuvering space is how many dead there will be, how many innocent dead will be in Gaza is the main number. This is the meta-strategic number. And Hamas is controlling this number. They will say 5,000, 7,000, 10,000.
But to Noor
no one can verify it.
But to Noor Ibrahim's point, as it goes on, Israel is going to lose support in the court of public opinion.
Of course. But I'm saying one of the main things is
Francois.
that how many innocent dead. Many people say they should be proportionate. You shouldn't kill Palestinians. You should only focus on Hamas military. So, if you have the control of Gazawi innocent civilian casualties, you have a control of public opinion in the world. And we know that they are liars. We know, for example, that Hamas stole 36,000 liters of diesel when hospital needed for the generators.
For the
UNRWA tried to publish it, and they were threatened, and they retrieved the tweet. Nothing goes out of Gaza without Hamas approval, and we just caught them red-handed lying.
Noor Ibrahim.
I don't think it's responsible to say that there is 99% certainty that it was a Palestinian rocket. I think if there's been investigations or as much investigation as possible from afar, from the BBC, from Channel 4, that raises a lot of questions, and also the conclusion, it's inconclusive. So I'm not sure what the science behind 99% sure about this comes from. But speaking to that point, if that is the case, if there are some questions raised, if there is conclusive evidence, just like the government of Israel has been saying, then why are we not allowing independent investigators to go in and seal the deal and figure out exactly what happened, say without a shadow of a doubt, who is responsible for this tragic incident? That's not happening, and I cannot really understand or grasp why either journalists or independent investigators can't be allowed to examine the situation. I know it's a war zone, but it's been done before. I don't, if we're talking about Hamas's lies, and that is a very fair point, but at the same time, I think that there's just some kind of a false narrative that the Israeli government doesn't lie, which has been proven wrong again and again. I think a point that's been raised a lot is the death of Shireen Abu Akleh, who is, was a very respected and beloved Palestinian journalist, and it played out exactly the same. Immediately, Israel attempted to point a finger at Palestinians. That narrative took hold. The media ran with it. There was no real attempt to, maybe even cast a doubt on the narrative that came out. And lo and behold, at the end of the day, what we find out was that it was,
but Israel
for sure,
came out.
inevitably,
But Israel
an
came
IDF
out
sniper
and
that
they said that
took
yes,
her down.
we did.
Yes.
Israel came out and said yes, we
It
did
took-
kill
it took
her.
some
They
time.
took responsibility.
were
They did the
cornered-
investigation. I mean, I think that I don't know if you're going to see any kind of admission coming from the Hamas.
Because the evidence was overwhelming. And I don't think it's fair for either you or me to say how exactly it would have played out.
No,
if the
we agree that
evidence
we
wasn't so
agree that we
overwhelming.
agree, Noor, that it's way too soon. Let's talk about how this is playing out more broadly. On his trip to Israel on Tuesday, which he maintained, Joe Biden did tell his hosts about America's mistakes after 9/11, warning Israel not to be, quote, consumed by rage and to squander the worldwide sympathy that it garnered after Hamas's October 7th attacks. In his first address from the Oval Office since it all started, U.S. President connecting the dots between Gaza and Ukraine.
Hamas and Putin represent different threats, but they share this in common. They both want to completely annihilate a neighboring democracy, completely annihilate it. Hamas' stated purpose for existing is the destruction of the state of Israel and the murder of Jewish people. Meanwhile, Putin denies Ukraine has or ever had real statehood. He claims the Soviet Union created Ukraine. And just 2 weeks ago, he told the world that if the United States and our allies withdraw, and if the United States withdraw, our allies will as well, military support for Ukraine would have, quote, a week left to live, but we're not withdrawing.
Borzou Dargahi, do you think U.S. public opinion follow Joe Biden's logic there?
I mean, I think maybe some people do reflexively. I mean, he talked about September 11th and the dangers of September 11th. I think lumping our bad guys into some kind of grouping was one of the mistakes that was a result of September 11th. And I think that grouping Hamas and Russia together is probably not so analytically coherent. I would say that one of the reasons why many people in the, many people, and I'm not necessarily agreeing with this position, but many people in the developing world, they are apathetic about Ukraine is because they look to Palestine, the UN-recognized territory currently occupied by Israel, and they see it as hypocrisy. It's like, yeah, when someone is your friend and they occupy territory, whether it's Morocco or Israel, you're cool with that. But when it's someone who's you're not your friend is occupying territory, then you're not cool with that. So I think that is one of the one point that I would make that is kind of the bad side effect of his flawed logic. And it's just, to compare a armed non-state actor to a nuclear superpower is just absurd.
Absurd? Do you agree with that, Matthew Dalton?
Well, I guess I might agree with Borzou that the analysis behind that might be a little shaky, but I do think he's doing this because he's making a smart political calculation, which is that
a domestic political calculation.
Domestic political calculation, because the support for Israel in the U.S. Congress is much stronger than the support for the war in Ukraine. The Republican Party is really quite divided on whether to continue support for Ukraine, but they are rock solid behind Israel, and as are the Democrats. So by tying this aid for Ukraine, which is pretty controversial, with the aid for Israel, which is not controversial at all. He's betting that he can kind of push both packages through Congress together, and that neither Republicans nor Democrats will have the political gumption to step up and object. And I think, except for a few people on the far left of the Democratic Party, no one is going to challenge this package in the sense of challenging it because of Israel. Republicans still might say, we're not going to buy this if Ukraine is tied, or few of the Republicans might say that.
Yeah, and right now, Capitol Hill is broken. We've just had a third ballot where they can't elect a Speaker of the House. How closely are people in your native Israel following U.S. domestic politics at this moment?
I think they have a couple of other things on their minds, and they were reassured by Biden. I mean, it's like the Clinton speech after Rabin's death. It was a real moment of communion between Israelis and the President of the United States. Some even said that they wanted to throw themselves at his feet, to say, stay, don't leave us here with this crazy guy who is our Prime Minister.
Are you suggesting Joe Biden's more popular than the current Prime Minister of Israel?
Much more popular, and it was a Shalom Chaver moment. It was just like this things that happened between Bill Clinton and Israel after Rabin's assassination. It was amazing. But just something about what Biden said. This is a Cold War speech. We are in blocks. You have to choose your camp. We saw the Chinese. In the last couple of years, we saw anti-Semitism in China, anti-Semitism without Jews. We know that one of the glues that create the global South is anti-Semitism. I mean, you can throw Israel under the bus, and you will still have the South against the United States, against Europe. I mean, people in Mali think that they ask themselves, how come France doesn't have gold mines and they have tons of gold in their central bank safe, and we have gold in our land and we don't have gold? I mean, you're talking about this kind of discourse. The South will always think that the Jews control the world, control the media, that even without Jews they will be anti-Semitic, and they will think that behind the Americans you have the marionette chief, which is a Jew. You can throw Israel under the bus like France and England threw Czechoslovakia under the bus. You'll have the same result. It doesn't mean that Netanyahu is right. It doesn't mean that Israel is right. But don't have illusions about the South.
Let me ask you.
I think it's way too overgeneralized. I mean, in general, I think that analysis is way too overgeneralized to smear the entire like billions of people as anti-Semite. I would like to see the peer-reviewed scientific study on that.
All right, disagreement on that. We see those.
Seconded.
With what is certain is that in this age of social media, there's a lot of unfiltered public opinion. There's been a huge surge in hate speech. And we're feeling it here in France. We're feeling it over in the United States, where it's been whipped up a bit into a frenzy. A 6-year-old Palestinian-American boy stabbed 26 times by his landlord in a suburb of Chicago. A landlord who was upset, quote, about what was going on in Jerusalem. Noor Ibrahim, you spoke with the family of Wadia Al-Fayoum, and that horrific tragedy was referenced by the U.S. president in his speech Thursday.
It's an absolute tragedy. It's even more unsettling when you realize that the landlord actually had, according to what the father told me, a very good relationship with the boy, so much so that he had apparently built him a tree house, that they played with him, and it just kind of highlights how a flip like that can happen, and how this kind of mass hysteria and just the effect of that, and the effect of what people are listening to, and how that can actually, translate into just a horrific situation with a 6-year-old boy who was stabbed 26 times. And it's really an idea that is just hard for, I think, any normal human being to wrap their head around. And I think that's, that just speaks to the responsibility that journalists have, that activists have to, just be very, very cautious and very careful and rely on evidence before, putting your stuff out there, because there are very significant real-life consequences, as this case so clearly showed.
Yeah, there is this fear of escalation popping up and hateful incidents where we don't expect them. Just getting back to the Middle East, those U.S. warships that last week we thought were for show, well, they're not just for show. In the Red Sea, the USS Carney intercepting 3 cruise missiles and several drones launched by the Iran-aligned Houthi movement from Yemen, potentially, but they're not sure, they were headed towards Israel.
We cannot say for certain what these missiles and drones were targeting, but they were launched from Yemen, heading north along the Red Sea, potentially towards targets in Israel.
Porsu Daragahi, when you think of when you think as well of those Israeli tanks that are heading not just west to the border with Gaza, but also north to the borders with Lebanon and Syria after daily salvos with the Iran-aligned Hezbollah movement in Lebanon. Is Iran fixing for a fight?
I don't think so. I don't think that they want to, because here's why. Because a fight would mean that they would have to unleash Hezbollah's very, very considerable arsenal of missiles on Israel. And I think that Israel would survive that. It would be devastating for Israel, but Israel would survive that and be ready to fight another day. Iran knows that. Iran wants to save that barrage of, I don't know how many tens of thousands of missiles are in Lebanon now, for the day that Israel decides that it's time to hit Iran's nuclear program. Maybe my logic is flawed, but I think that that is probably the thing that is, that is the calculation that is, for now, keeping a broader, more dangerous, more all-encompassing war off the table.
Gil Mihaly, you agree? Because we've seen all these advisories urging citizens, Saudi Arabia, France, Germany, etc., telling their citizens to leave Lebanon.
Well, first of all, until Friday, October 6th, in Israel, many thought that Hamas doesn't have a clear interest in escalating with Israel, that they are becoming more or less responsible government. They asked for more work permits in Israel. So it was this old paradigm that we, even though they want to kill us, maybe it will be when the Messiah will arrive. You can have a theological solution when you could still want to kill everyone, but you don't do it immediately, and which is a fair deal. So everything collapsed Saturday morning. And the problem is that we are a hospital incident away from losing control. And when Hamas is firing rockets, not missiles, rockets are not precise. They fired at Kiryat.
But here we're talking about the border with Lebanon.
This was I'm talking about. The local
Hezbollah, you're saying then?
The local franchise of the Lebanese franchise of Hamas, which works under the holding of Hezbollah, fired rockets at cities in the north of Israel. When you fire a rocket, it's like playing blackjack. It could fall in a field, and it could fall on a hospital. You can have 0 dead, 0 damage, and you can have 500 kids dead. And you don't control it. Once you push the fire button, you cannot control it could be a mistake from the Israeli side. Iron Dome could be, out of function. The wind could blow it. You don't know what. So if you fire, you have to take into account the fact that you can lose control of the situation. We are currently at this situation. This is one. Number two, Hezbollah is not a marionette of Iran. They attacked Israel in 2006 without permission from Iran. And according to the American intelligence, Hamas attacked without permission from Iran. Iran helped them to create the capability, but Iran didn't push the button, probably. So we have all kinds of actors. These actors take huge risks. to add to the hospital in Gaza, the Palestinian group that fired that rocket hoped that what happened in Ahali hospital will happen in Israel. This is why they fired a non-precise rocket to Israel, to a civilian city. This is what they hoped it will happen. The fact that it happened to them because of an accident is an accident. But if you fire a rocket on on Haifa, what do you expect?
So, Matthew Dalton.
Well, I wouldn't dare to predict what's going through the heads of the Iranian leaders, but I do, think that there is a risk that, in particular, once Israel invades Gaza Strip, as it most likely will do, the scenes from that invasion start going around the world. The massacres multiply, the civilian casualties multiply. That the publics in various Arab countries are going to, and those Arab leaders are going to feel pressure to in some way intervene, some way to do something on behalf of the Palestinian people. And it's not something that they are going to want to do themselves, but I fear that unrest in the Arab street could spark something that is more far-reaching.
Very briefly on this, Noor Ibrahim.
Yeah, I agree with what was just said in terms of the ground invasion kind of opening up the door for a wider regional conflict, and one that could have just massive implications across the region, as well as, as these things always turn out, more loss of innocent civilian life. I think, the latest that we've heard about the ground invasion from Israeli officials, they had laid out some kind of a vague goals and initiatives there, including installing a new security regime, and did not provide further details. So I really think it depends a lot on what exactly that means, and I think the way the ground invasion will play out is definitely going to be a pivotal moment as far as whether this is going to escalate into a wider war, whether that will prompt Hezbollah or other actors to get involved. So I think the next few hours or days are going to be extremely
crucial on that score. We're getting confirmation now that those two U.S. hostages held in the Gaza Strip are in the hands of the International Red Cross. Again, a reminder that there are more than 200 hostages being held by Hamas and other Palestinian militant groups. And the next hours, the next days will be volatile. The Arab street this week was mad with Israel, was mad with the United States, not only in former French protectorate Tunisia. Tuesday's shelling of the hospital in Gaza had an angry crowd spontaneously converging outside on Avenue Bourguiba, outside the French embassy then. There were demonstrations the two following days. And there is this... what was your reaction to that, Matthew Dalton, by the way? The fact that the French embassy is where they decide to go protest.
Well, because France is the colonial power, the former colonial power in the country. So, the United States is not, I guess, nearly as present. So if you're going to look for an established power to go after, I guess it would be the French. I think, I think France itself and Macron himself has been trying to strike a balance between in this conflict,
but in the end,
a way
it was the courts who overruled his government and allowed pro-Palestinian demonstrations in France on Thursday.
Yeah, I guess that was one instance where they've been. But I think that Macron himself, in his public statements, they supported the Brazilian resolution at the UN for a ceasefire. I think that they've been trying to hew a different line from the United States in this.
The irony of the situation is that in Tunisia, all these guys will give all they have in the world to get a visa to France.
Amid the finger pointing and the bomb scares, we've had bomb scares here in France a lot this week. It's been tense, and France is also still processing last Friday's second fatal attack on a high school teacher in 3 years. Thursday, in the northern city of Arras, the funeral of French teacher Dominique Bernard, who tried to stop a radicalized former student as he embarked on a stabbing spree on the grounds of the high school where he taught.
Il aimait la lumière rasante du soir.
He loved the low evening light.
Il n'aimait pas l'informatique.
He didn't like computers or social media.
Le téléphone.
He didn't even have a
Il n'en avait
phone.
même pas. Il n'aimait
He
pas
didn't
la
like
foule,
crowds nor
ni
honors.
les honneurs, les
He
cérémonies
abhorred
qu'il avait
ceremony.
d'horreur.
Sensitive and discreet,
Discret,
he didn't like the
il
noise
n'aimait
and
pas le
furore
bruit
of
et
the
la fureur
world.
du monde.
Borzou Dargahi, your thoughts on again, this is all happening in a context where everybody's glued to their television sets and their phones.
I mean, the world is mad, and I wish you're absolutely right. I wish people would just turn it off for a second. But, I mean, it's terrible. One of the reasons why I was so enthusiastic about putting my daughter in school in France is to avoid, these sort of lockdown drills and these kind of warnings about school shootings and so on that you have in the United States. And guess what? This week, they had the same kind of stuff at the school where she attends in France. And, it's awful. It's a tragedy. It's, terrible what has happened to this teacher. It's terrible what happened to the Samuel Paty. But I think it's incumbent upon us not to make these into, to not necessarily make these into very broad political statements. I mean, this was a disturbed person. Was he radicalized? Was he part of a network? Probably, he was probably not part of any kind of network or anything like that. And from the Caucasus, as I understand it, kind of a fragmented, fractured identity lured to these extreme thoughts and thinking. Is there a pattern in French society that is moving in that direction? I don't know. I mean, it's something for people to look into. But we should be careful not to make this tragedy necessarily, not to draw some kind of major sociological statement about any community in France or Europe based on these kinds of lone wolf incidents.
And the government initially said that this was likely tied to the violence in Israel. And then the prosecutor came out later and said that actually this guy only made a passing reference to the conflict. He didn't link his act to the conflict. So it was not, as we might have thought earlier, really driven by what happened between Israel and Hamas. He was an Islamist radical in France, probably acting on his own without necessarily a geopolitical connection.
Well, what's certainly true is that here in the country that's home to Europe's largest Jewish and Muslim population, everybody's on edge. Case in point, the owners of a fast food joint in the southern French city of Valence with an unfortunate run-in with municipal police. The establishment is called Chamos Tacos, and for more than a month they've been waiting on an estimate to change their partially broken billboard. Needless to say, the images that read Hamas Tacos have gone viral. Let's hope that they can get it fixed and not get a fine.
By the way, French tacos are not very good. They're not real tacos, FYI to people who are not in France.
Okay, so you're priming the pump for another important debate. Many thanks, Borzou Dargahi, for joining us from Istanbul. I want to thank Noor Ibrahim in New York City, as well as Gil Mahaley, Matthew Dalton. Thank you for being with us here in the world this week.
And free Evan.
And free Evan, indeed.
Free Evan.